So Hazel, it's a great pleasure to welcome you back to the program. How are you?
I am fine. Thank you so much. This is such a good opportunity, isn't it? For now, I've got a little thing here and I need to get it off the screen. Yes, it was asking me whether I wanted to continue the recording, and I'm sure you do. So,
Yeah, that would be great.
yes. So here we are with all of these new spikes in the virus in the USA, and many states, including the state I live in here in Florida, where everything opened up. Like I live in this tourist city, which you know very well, St. Augustine, and we get 6 million visitors a year. And for the last 3 weeks, the whole thing has been almost like it was normal. Everybody walking around, no distancing, no masks, all the bars open, everybody having a good time. And so, of course, that means for people like me, I have to stay shut in even more carefully now because of all of the additional, So that's going on in Arizona, Texas, and looks like it will give our economy another unnecessary big hit, because it looks like perhaps Texas is getting ready to shut down again. And so you can imagine we've got 40 million unemployed and a president who doesn't believe in science. And I must say, I did get a little schadenfreude about his big rally yesterday in Arizona, and all of those young people using TikTok. And they inflated the number of people he thought was coming to about 1 million. And they got this huge arena, with 20,000 seats. And the number of the Arizona police was that were only 6,200 people there. That's a terribly large number, but they forced them all into the small area so that they could keep the camera on them and not show that all of the stands were empty. So this is, I grew up in Britain, and this is my beloved adopted country, but I am just, it's just the most tragic thing that's going on in this country. And so what's saving the markets, as you know, and causing all of this market spiking is, number one, is the Fed. There's now 7 trillion of quantitative easing assets on the Fed's account. And the total amount of stimulus is 11 trillion, because the fiscal side now has been taking up its responsibilities, which it sort of left to the Fed for a long time. And so they are now passing all of these multi-trillion-dollar bills, which we need because there's no other way. If we're a consumer-driven economy, 70% of the economy is consumer spending. And if people have no jobs, there's no other way of keeping up the aggregate demand and the purchasing power other than practically going back to Milton Friedman's idea, which he called helicopter money, which is you just go up in the helicopter with big bunches of dollar bills and throw them out the window. And he always said, okay, if you actually want to stimulate an economy, don't try to go through the money center banks, which the textbooks tell you to do, because it won't trickle down. They'll just send it right offshore into investing in credit default swaps to see which European country is going to have its sovereign bonds hit. And the textbooks don't recognize, as you know, the globalization of finance. And so anyway, I have been trying for the longest time, as you know, Mariana, to get to the heart of the problem, and that is all the misunderstandings about money. Of course, we print money. Every central bank prints money. That's what they are mandated to do. And there's nothing wrong with printing money as long as you make sure you just don't throw it out there so that it goes right back into the financial system as asset bubbles. And what we're having now is asset bubbles. And of course, you know, we've got a winner's circle now, are the FANGs, you know, Amazon and Facebook and all the social media. Of course, everybody has to operate the way we're doing right now, online. And then there's the biotech companies and the hundreds of different approaches to vaccines. And what I can I'm really hoping won't happen is what happened when there was a rush to vaccines in the polio epidemic we had in this country. You know, FDR got polio, was in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And what happened was that one very ambitious company with a lot of investors brought out a polio vaccine without enough testing on a large enough population, and hundreds of children got polio from the vaccine. So, you know, we don't want to see the same thing happen again. So those are the kind of winner's circle stocks now, you know, biotech and the FANGs. And then the other winner's circle, which I'm very happy about, of course, is renewable energy. And I'm just reading a piece in the new edition of The Economist, and they're saying, okay, there's this huge bonanza now coming into the financial market of green investing. And they point out, as I've been pointing out, and one of the reasons I started Ethical Markets Media was to keep these big pension fund managers and banks and institutional investors honest about these so-called green and impact funds. And of course, the problem is that an awful lot of it is window dressing and greenwashing. And, you know, you have people like Larry Fink, you know, sending letters to all of the portfolio companies in their $7 trillion account and saying, well, you know, you have to be good people and you have to do all of these things and you have to do the stakeholder model now, forget about the shareholders so much. And yet in his own portfolio, he still has $1 trillion of assets committed to tearing down rainforests for producing meat. And, you know, so I'm very glad that The Economist, there's a big section in The Economist this week, and they're saying, okay, how do we really make sure that green investing doesn't end up having a bad name and not doing the right thing? And so I agree with them. They say, all right, we have to have carbon taxes. And of course, I've been saying, why only carbon? Why not pollution taxes across the board? Why not make externalities illegal? Why allow accountants to do illegal accounting? And the interesting thing is that Ethical Markets did many surveys a long time ago about what kind of taxes the American people would favor. And the kind of tax that got an 82% approval was pollution taxes. Everybody understands that we should tax the bads, you know. And so why they limit it to carbon? I have been debating this with so many of my friends in the US, in the investment community, in the business community. Please just call them pollution taxes and you'll win every time. But nobody knows what you mean by a carbon tax. You know, why? I mean, we're all made of carbon. There's nothing wrong with carbon. I mean, we know carbon is extremely useful. And now we're looking at all of the wonderful ways we can capture carbon by doing it nature's way. And that is in restoring soils and bringing back the kind of forest management and agricultural, ecological agriculture and indigenous agriculture, which is the way the roots of plants actually capture the ambient carbon and put it back in the soil where it belongs. But you know, that's too easy. And there's all of these big scientists, you know, the people at MIT want another grant. And they want to have these huge contraptions added to coal-fired power plants to capture the carbon that comes out of the chimney, which is like cutting butter with a chainsaw. You know, why not just let nature do her job and capture it, you know, because that's the way it's going to be done with all kinds of, you know, reforms to the food system. So the two things that I'm concentrating on right now is one, getting politicians and the public to understand about how projects like the Green New Deal and all of the stimulus projects, how they actually are always funded. And the ideology of the oligarchs in this country who recruited all of the economists at the University of Chicago to get the idea that, oh, we can't do any big project for the public good unless we first pass the hat and get taxpayers to put money in that they already saved. And of course, that's exactly backwards to how it actually happens. And how it actually happens is that the Congress has the power of the purse. And the Congress decides, okay, we are going to, like in FDR's day, we're going to have a New Deal. And we're going to build the Hoover Dam. And that would never get built by private enterprise. There's no way. And so the way these big projects are always funded is that the Congress passes a law to say, we are going to build the Hoover Dam. We are committed. And then the Treasury says, okay, well, we'll put out bonds and guarantee all kinds of guarantees. And then the private sector comes in and bids for the contracts. And so that's the way it's actually done. And yet the politicians have bought into this whole idea that somehow deficits are the problem, and we have to we cannot do any project that might raise the deficit. Whereas really the thing we have to focus on is inflation. And obviously, if the Congress puts into law a project which overextends the actual physical realities of the resource base and the population and the talent, and do we have enough doctors or do we have enough engineers? That's what causes inflation. And so I have been trying for the longest time to get that word across and to get people to understand that that's actually the way the projects are funded, is by a decree and not by taxing and borrowing. And luckily enough, there is a wonderful new book, which I'm about to write a review of, by the leading proponent of this new thinking, which is, thank heavens, finally catching up in the economics profession, called Modern Monetary Theory. And Stephanie Kelton is one of its leading proponents. And she has just written a new book called The Deficit Myth, which is making incredible waves and getting people to understand that if we didn't fund the future, all the green infrastructure we need and all of those big projects, then if they hadn't funded the Hoover Dam, Los Angeles would still be a village. You know, I mean, it's also obvious. So anyway, that's my big focus now. And, you know, you and I have been on these seminars with our colleagues at the Club of Rome and the World Academy on the future of money and trying to get people to understand. So I know you have written, and you have a new book coming out, which I'm thrilled about. And so I know we agree tremendously, and I love your approach to integrative investing, because it means expanding the lens and looking at the whole picture before you put the money in. So what do you think, Marianne?
Well, absolutely. As you know, I'm approaching all of this from the early stage investing, which is something that is much more easier to control and influence and bring about change, because you have smaller teams and you have younger people, you have more flexible minds, I should say, which of course does apply to you and us. So not all older people are inflexible in their thinking. But given the fact that 55% of all the GDP is created by small and medium enterprises, and they are creating the largest amounts of jobs, not the big corporations, but the small ones, starting to shift that thinking from for profit only toward an integration between people, planet, and profit, to summarize somewhat. Yes. Is a bottom-up approach, is my approach to show that it can be done in a different way. Yes. What I call integral sustainability.
Yes, exactly.
So
we're totally on the same page.
Excuse me?
We're totally on the same page. That's why you're on our advisory board and I'm on yours.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you
For full disclosure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You said that there are two things that you would recommend moving forward on how to jumpstart the economy after COVID-19. So the first one was the influence the politicians and get the Congress to mandate what needs to be done. And what was the second? For some reason, I missed that one.
Oh, yes. And that is reform of the global food system.
Right.
And
okay.
The global food system, I can go on at length about this and bore everybody for the last 2 years. And that is that we have this crazy global food system based on 5 very vulnerable monocultured cereal crops: corn, wheat, soybeans, rice, alfalfa, that are traded in the commodity trading desks all over the world. And basically, this agrochemical industrial system for food production and sales and promotion, which uses advertising and marketing of junk foods and all of this, okay, there's a lot of reform in the system now, but they still haven't got to the heart of the problem. And the heart of the problem is that all of our food is grown on 3% of the planet's fresh water, which is dwindling very rapidly because of climate change. And yet, we on planet Earth is the water planet. We're not short of water. 97% of the water on the planet happens to be saline. And guess what? The other half of the planet's food kingdom, plant kingdom, are salt-loving food plants, which are highly nutritious, have complete proteins, have mineral profiles which are perfectly suited to the human body. And guess what? Some of them have made it into the supermarkets. Everybody knows the grain, quinoa, delicious grain, which grows wild on the salt flats of around Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, and actually grows all over the world, anywhere there is salty water and desert land. Guess what? There is also China's salt-tolerant rice, which almost grows on beaches in southern China and is actually more nutritious and delicious and has a higher market value than regular rice. And the new one that I have just participated in a seminar at Arizona State University is on the next salt-loving plant, which we can really commercialize now, which is called Salicornia. And it's called, otherwise known as a sea asparagus. And there are gourmet chefs creating delicious dishes. You know, you can cook it or you can put it in salads. It's served in gourmet restaurants. And so this is purely a marketing problem. It's not even, it's not a financial problem. And the reason I say that is because now, as you know, there's a double-digit growth worldwide of the shift to plant-based foods and beverages. There are about 100 startup companies in this area, which we follow quite closely. A couple of them have made it to IPOs, you know, like Beyond Meat, and Impossible Foods is the next one. And then there are all the companies that are committed to creating meat from stem cells in the laboratory. And their commitment is no human meat food in diets will ever be produced from an animal anymore. It will just be produced from the petri dishes of the animal's stem cells. And so why are all of these investors now putting the global plant-based food sector into double-digit growth? And it's growing, you know, 10 times faster than the regular food system. And basically, the group we work with, based in Britain, is a consortium of investment groups all over the world, including some big sovereign wealth funds like the one in Singapore, you know, Temasek. And they are committed animal rights people. They are vegans and vegetarians. And as you know, many, many people in Asia, you know, these cultures are largely vegetarian anyway, in India and a lot in Asian countries. And so their assets under management in this business now are $21 trillion with a T. And that's why they're moving the market so fast, because not only are they investing in all these startups, but they are also shorting the 16 biggest meat producers that are tearing down the rainforest for cattle and and growing feed, you know, for cows. And the reason that all this comes together in a very integrated and systemic way is that all of this animal factory farming, which is going on with chickens and hogs, and now really spreading viruses and all kinds of terrible things, basically accounts for 15% of all of the greenhouse gases being emitted in the world. So shifting to salt-loving plants and the 400 overlooked food plants that just, you know, nobody pays any attention to because the big boys don't. Basically, that change could actually bend the ambient CO2 level on the planet in the next 10 years that the IPCC says is the timeline. And so it's plenty of money. See, there's 21 trillion of assets under management being pumped into this thing. All we need is to get over the theory-induced blindness. You know, this is one of the cognitive biases that Daniel Kahneman talks about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And the cognitive bias of all of the academic institutes and all across the board is that they don't think about saltwater plants. And they don't realize there's no shortage of water. Just like there's no shortage of money, there's no shortage of water. And that these plants could also grow on scrubland, desert land that's not being used currently, and they could conserve the precious fresh water for human drinking and washing, what we need it for. So, I mean, we have a video on ethicalmarkets.com playing right now on our homepage called Investing in Saltwater Agriculture, the Next Big Thing. So let's overcome the theory-induced blindness.
Perfectly. Thank you for that. That's really a beautiful outlook on what we could do today in trying to shift that old thinking. So yeah. How do you think, what kind of economic models do you think would help us, if we adopted them, bring about this shift? Because obviously there's something in there that prevents us from changing. Do you think that the market will regulate it just as much as you pointed out to the Impossible Burger or the technology-driven agriculture that we see? Is that a way that you think will happen? Or do you think that our politicians and regulators will get it so that we could accelerate that? So is it a free market-driven change, or is it intentional?
Okay, well, the first thing we have to do is to understand the truth that in all the issues that we're dealing with today, whether it's racism, sexism, misogyny, poverty, inequality, climate change, pandemics, it's basically all about power and how power is distributed in societies. And then the different value systems and sets of principles that, that incentivize the population. That's where understanding money is so important, because the powerful in any country, they accumulate power in some way, and then they weaponize the economy and the money system. And once you force everybody to run as if money is the only thing that matters, and sacrifice all of the other values around money, then what you've done really with all of the metrics, GDP, all of the statistical indicators, I call them basically, if you put that set of principles into running your society, put that in the hard drive that's running the society, the operating system, what you get is the 7 deadly sins. I mean, think about it. The textbook economic model, still taught in most textbooks, is that humans are competitive, selfish, acquisitive, you know, I mean, come on. And yet, most societies all throughout human history have operated on another set of operating principles, which are systemic and integrated. And that's called the golden rule. Don't do anything to anybody that you wouldn't want to have done to yourself. That is a perfect system statement. And it's incorporated now very much in the United Nations steering mechanism, which is taking over from GDP. And that is the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 integrated, interrelated human goals ratified by 193 countries in New York at the UN in 2015, that represent what most people in the world actually think is the way we should operate. This is our highest value system. Every single religious tradition and spiritual tradition is about don't do anything to harm anybody else because it might rebound to harm you. And so I like to put things very simple terms, which is one of the reasons I like to work in media. And let's put that down to a bumper sticker. Steering societies away from GDP toward the SDGs. And so basically that's the model. And throw out the textbooks and forget about the 19th century debates between communism and capitalism and socialism and anarchism and populism. All of that languaging is unhelpful. And there is actually nothing wrong with markets. Human beings have been doing markets since we came out of the trees. You know, I loved Karl Polanyi's first book. I also loved The Great Transition, but his earlier book, and I knew him and was a friend of his wife's. She invited me up to stay with her in Toronto after he passed away. And his first book was all about natural markets in human societies. And his examples were like the Polynesian traders that went all across these Pacific islands in canoes, and their currency was shells. And then Native Americans, their currency for all the trading they did all over the Americas was wampum, which you know, basically strips of leather. And then even in Britain, in the 18th century, they used tally sticks, you know, actually sticks of wood, you know, saying who owed what to whom. So the reason I called my company Ethical Markets Media and started it in 2004 and funded myself, you know, from royalties from my books and our TV shows and everything. We don't take advertising so that I can totally tell the truth exactly as I see it. And basically, I wanted to lay out why markets are very useful. And as long as they are based on trust and transparency and fidelity in contractual contracts and agreements, and they're driven by the golden rule, then markets evolve in very useful ways. I mean, if Adam Smith came back today, he wouldn't recognize green markets. He wouldn't recognize social markets. Like, you know, he wouldn't understand about green bonds. So markets can evolve to reflect our highest values and incentivize our populations in a very futuristic, positive way. So let's not throw out markets. Let's just throw out all the garbage ideological language and throw out those old economic textbooks.
So how do we do that? Because as you say, we are actually exporting a model that has been proven not to work properly ever since the financial crisis. We know that whatever we've been teaching in our MBA programs, you know, only worked in part. So how do we bring about that transformation? You know, is COVID-19 something that we could actually leverage to wake up and bring about the policies and the regulations and the laws that are needed in order to transform? Or is something else that should be happening there? What is your view on it? Because I totally get you. And the question is, if we listen to science, we only have 10 years to bring the necessary changes in order to save ourselves from disastrous climate changes. So yes. Are we going to use those 10 years to bring about significant transformation? Or Are we going to leave it up to the markets to do
Well,
that? In which case it might take much longer.
I think that basically nature is now, the planet is teaching humans directly. And it's giving us lots of kicks in the pants, whether it's fires or floods or more powerful hurricanes or sea level rise. And so basically, we created the pandemics, we humans, by our behavior. We created them. And what the planet is trying to say with this latest wake-up call, which is the coronavirus, is don't chop down forests and don't kill and trade and eat animals. Pretty simple. I mean, we're finding now that the slaughterhouses and the meat packing operations in the US are all virus hotspots. And if you talk to any ecologist, they will tell you that the virus we have right now, COVID-19, will be with us forever. We're not going to be able to stamp it out. And it will be followed by many, many other viruses. And that viruses actually serve a purpose in the biosphere. And if you look at the evolution of human beings, our bodies, about 10% of the evolution, the good evolution, basically the changes that have been caused by viral infections actually have produced about 10% of the mutations which have made our brains larger, which have enabled us to walk on 2 feet. And so we don't understand our relationship with viruses. I mean, I sit out in my backyard in the evening and I watch all the bats. I adore watching the bats. I wouldn't think of eating them. See, bats have hundreds of viruses that'd be terrifying if they got into the human body. But I'm not about to catch a bat and eat it, you see. And so if you have these wet markets, you know, where you have animals there that eat bats, like pangolins, then you're going to have viruses jump to human beings. And I just reconnected with a friend of mine, Dr. Larry Brilliant, who was advisor to Google, you know, the Google Venture Fund. And I remember the last time Larry called me, you know, we had him on one of our first TV shows because he helped eliminate smallpox. And he called me about the H1N1 virus. And Google at that time was way ahead of all of the CDC and the WHO because they were tracking keywords on their search engines. And they knew that H1N1 was very widely distributed and was going to be a real problem. And so he called me and told me all this and said, you know, we really need a lot of public education. See, a lot of this today is about public education and changing the messages that people get. And as I've said in a lot of my writing, in Building a Win-Win World, chapter 5 of Building a Win-Win World was all about the fact that we now live in mediocrities. Doesn't matter what form of government we think we live under. We live in mediocrities and attention economies. And so throw out the old textbooks. I never heard of anything like this, you know. And yet you know that the algorithms that all the search engines use are about capturing people's attention and holding people's attention on that screen so they can sell them junk. And so, so some of the cutting edge reforms are not only the reform of the food system, which is really the biggie, and exposing the monopoly of our food system by money-making commodity traders, you know, and the 5 big companies, you know. And so there's the concentration of power in, you'll have to watch that very carefully. We're looking now at the concentration of power in the social media companies, the FANGs, you know, whether it's Amazon or Facebook or Microsoft or Google, Alphabet, whatever. Basically, they have to be broken up. And you find that both sides of the aisle in the US Congress are absolutely agreed about, they're holding hearings as we speak about antitrust legislation to break these companies up. Oh my God, you know, Zuckerberg is going crazy, you know, this is terrible, you know, Sheryl Sandberg going on TV and all of this. And yet I remember when I was a science advisor in Washington, and I spent 6 years as a cabinet level science policy wonk in Washington. And basically during that time, we broke up AT&T. You know, that was the telephone monopoly, Ma Bell. And everybody said, oh my God, this is like the end of the world. And what actually happened? Well, we ended up with 5 baby bells, many more jobs, lots more innovation. And why would it be any different breaking up Facebook and breaking up, I mean, Amazon must be broken up because they're just gobbling up all of the retail companies in the world because we were all stuck at home and I'm as bad as anybody else. I've been buying stuff on Amazon because I'm not allowed to go to the store. So you see, it's all about power, and we don't have to think about textbook models. We are now at real time. We are seeing the system evolving in real time. And you know that we were both on a seminar last week together on the future of finance in terms of financing whole system change. And I wanted to clarify the use of that terminology because it was too abstract. You see, abstraction, I wrote an editorial recently called Financialization, the Global Casino and the Illusions of Abstraction. And you can be so abstract. So financing whole system change. Well, right now, we're in a whole system change. Humans didn't do anything about it. Nature did. It's you know, getting our attention with the pandemic. So I agree with you that the pandemic, properly understood, is telling us that we must go forward with a greener, cleaner, more equitable, distributed kind of society with not so much cruise ship travel, not so much tourism. You know, in my book, Politics of the Solar Age, I used an ad which I found and I reproduced, and its headline was, "Stop Tourism, Make Where You Are a Paradise." That was a story that Fritjof Capra, my good friend, we wrote this article together it was published back in March, called Pandemics, Lessons Looking Back from 2050. And we imagined that we were looking back from the year 2050 and how had the pandemic changed our societies and how we learned the lessons. Because we have a glorious future ahead of us if we learn the lessons. But the planet is not going to let us go on messing things up this way.
I couldn't agree more with you, and both you and Fritjof have been great, have had great influences in my life. I remember reading his book, The Tao of Physics, you know, that basically changed my entire view of the world. And
Me too.
it's for you. So would you like to give our audience a summary of that amazing editorial that the two of you wrote?
Well, we just pointed out that cities had become clean, the air had become breathable because all of the transportation, mostly public transportation, buses and stuff, were all electric. And that the only electric cars that people had for private use were basically, you know, for short trips, you know, and otherwise we had electric rail, and that cities had really gone into neighborhoods, and neighborhoods had become far more cooperative, and there was babysitting rosters, you know, where people could share babysitting chores, and the global financial system, which I always called the global casino, had collapsed of its own weight because all of those long value chain had all failed. You know, we suddenly found that all of our pharmaceuticals came from China, and China needed them for itself, and the rest of the world needed them. And so we realized the vulnerability of that kind of narrow globalization. And instead, we had the kind of globalization that John Maynard Keynes talked about. And that was, he always said, why would you want to ship around cakes and biscuits and cookies? Just ship around the recipes. And that's what I have done, you know, in all of my work in China. I've been going to China for many years, since 1986. And my message always was, please learn all the mistakes we're making. You can see them right now, you know, with the automobiles choking the air in cities and all of that. And our message was, let's exchange the recipes for cleaner, greener technologies, and super energy efficiency, and renewable agriculture, and going where we can to differentiated currency systems. So you could empower all the barter systems at the local level. There's many, many barter systems now. You can do it all online. There are many barter systems now operating online. And then ratify local currencies. So like they did in Brazil under President Lula, about 200 small towns in Brazil had their own local currencies, and they cleared their own markets and employed their own people. And they didn't put any particular weight on the national currency, the real. And so the central bank said, great, you clear your own markets with your own local currency, and you can raise local taxes. And just like they did in the city of Curitiba, where all that began many, many years ago under Mayor Lerner, who is also a friend of mine, became governor of the state of Paraná. And so then you would have, okay, you need a national currency for things that people can't make locally. So you always have a local currency and a barter system on one pocket, and the national currency in another pocket. And then the national governments do need an international currency, where you do need to trade things which you desperately need. I mean, right now, it's basically rare earths for cell phones, like cobalt and molybdenum. And it's a very interesting new company that I think will be a winner, a startup in Vancouver called Deep, I'm not quite sure now of the title of the company, but what they're saying is, as we shift to all electric transportation, we have to make sure that the elements, the rare earth elements for the batteries, don't come out of the ground. We can't do any more surface mining, like mining for cobalt in Central African Republic, because for the 1% of cobalt, you have to dig up 99% of rock, and it all ends up in tailings, in rivers, and it's ridiculous. So this company, I wish I could remember the last name, but I'll tell you about it because it's right for early investors right now. And they discovered in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there is a large area where there are nodules of rare earths, all of the metals, the rare earths needed for cell phones, where nature has agglomerated them into the pure, they're called deep, naturally aggregated nodules. And they're all ready to go. All you have to do is to have a trawler and go pick them up in trawler nets. So that's what that company is doing. And they did a wonderful life cycle analysis, which some of my friends got involved in, Corey Krosinski, who's now at Yale. And they said it was really the best life cycle analysis they'd ever seen. And they compare in this life cycle analysis the energy and material and ecological costs of mining on the surface for these minerals versus collecting the nodules from the deep ocean. And it's like a 90% energy efficiency saving. Don't you like that? So, you know, what we did in our last Green Transition Scoreboard, we pulled all this stuff together, and it's called Transitioning to Science-Based Investing. And that's what you do and you've been doing for many years. And that's what we advocate. But what we need now is more media understanding of this. And, you know, we have a globally distributed TV show that goes to business schools and colleges, but nothing yet. We have not been able to penetrate mainstream media because the editors don't get it. They don't have the knowledge. They never heard of halifites, you know, and they don't see why GDP is now obsolete. They still parrot the GDP numbers, although we have a new survey in the field now called Beyond GDP. It's the fourth one we've done with our partners at GlobeScan. It's in the field right now in 10 countries. And every time we've done this survey, we did the first one for the European Commission in 2007, when I was on the steering committee of this group called Beyond GDP. We're going to put this conference together. And the results of that survey I presented at the European Parliament with a standing only group of delegates and everything for this whole thing we put together on Beyond GDP, and we brought all the statisticians from around the world who were doing statistics on health, on education, environment, you know, quality, workplace, all of that kind of stuff. And we found that in every one of those countries, huge majorities understood that you couldn't measure the progress of their country using a cash flow money model like the GDP. And so they agreed with us that we should add all the available statistics on health, education, and environment. So we've got another one in the field now. This time my company is not going to have to pay its half of the share. The GlobeScan people came to me 2 weeks ago and said, hey, Hazel, we've got this in the field now. We're using the same model that you used the last 3 surveys. And you don't have to pay for it now because it's so real. So we're about to report, and they say, talking about media, they say they think that they can get The Economist to report on it. So we keep our fingers crossed.
Wow, yeah, let's do that, because basically what we need is reaching the tipping point of people who have the more integrated mindset that brings about the transformation. So it's a leadership question, and media helps, of course. And what we see right now is the fight between the progressives and the regressives. And so the question is, how can we, and this is the last question for you, thank you for being so generous with your time, how can we accelerate this mind shift? The reason I'm asking that is we need to break the silos. So you have the social investors, then you have the environmental investors, then you have the technical investors, the advanced technology and so on, the exponential tech, and then you have the politicians and the law. And so we need to bring them all together. This is where we all, both of you, come together in terms of integrated investing.
Yes.
How do we do that? Because there are very few people who get me, for example. You know, I'm an environmentalist, and I am a socialist, and I am an artificial intelligence major. I invest in technology. And the moment I try to bring them together, I get attacked by the silos. So,
same thing with me, you see. and I think that unlike you with your 2 earned PhDs, I have no earned PhDs, but I do have 4 honorary PhDs. And so I feel very grateful that I was never put into a silo.
But you earned the honorary PhDs as well. It doesn't mean that, you know, they were not given to you because of your pretty eyes. You earned them.
No, they were mostly for my role in technology assessment and those issues. And so it really is a matter now of the general public following the children. You see, the children understand that. See, none of this is complicated. What happens with all the people in the silos, they have to make it complicated so they can get the next grant, you know. And that's what I call cutting butter with a chainsaw, you see. And with the Greta Thunbergs and all the young people realize that we live on a beautiful planet, and it is powered by the free photons from our mother star, the sun. I mean, every indigenous society understood this from the start. A lot of them were sun worshippers. They knew that that was where our free energy came. Our first technology was photosynthesis. Plants figured out how to harvest the photons and turn them into carbohydrates. That is the basis of our food supply. And see, so it's all very simple, actually. You just have to understand how the planet that you live on actually functions. And, you know, basically follow nature's principles. And, you know, one of our beloved partners is the Biomimicry Institute. And my good friend, Janine Benyus. And I remember when her book came out on biomimicry, I think about 1996, something like that. I bought dozens of copies. I was giving them to all my friends, saying, oh my God, she's got it. All you have to do is nature has successfully operated this planet, you know, for 3.8 billion years. And the human species is the most successful species on the planet, you know, and we have now occupied every ecosystem, but we've done it in such a clumsy, ignorant way that we're causing the next extinction of other species, not realizing that we are one species and we are dependent on all the other species. And then, you know, and all this is really simple stuff. And the children get it. The millennials get it. You know, And the indigenous people get it. Anyone who's been really away from the textbooks and operating in the real world gets it. So if we have to be out in the streets the way people are right now all over the world, saying, look, this inequality and all of these things that are going on with racism. And, you know, I grew up in the city of Bristol in England. And I always wondered as a child why I walked by this statue of this guy Colston, and everything in Britain was named Colston this and Colston that. And then I remember there was a street in Bristol called Black Boy Hill. And I began to realize that the town that I grew up in was built on the slave trade. And that all the riches in Bristol and all of, you know, the respected philanthropists in Bristol earned their money off slavery. And they sent ships from Bristol to West Africa and then over to the United States to drop the cargo. And then they brought back tobacco and sugar to Bristol. And so even in Britain now, everybody now is saying, okay, it's time to actually, let's learn what we never learned in the textbooks. And let's be honest with ourselves. And that's what the planet is teaching us.
Well, what a beautiful way to end our interview. Thank you so much. Learn from nature, learn from plants, and replicate what they're teaching us. Thank you so much for being on our program.
Oh, thank you, Mariana. And keep up your good work, my dear. It's a pleasure to be on your team.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to know you, my dear friend, and stay healthy and safe.
Thank you.